Speaking of which, for those of you who are new on the line and perhaps didn't see the news, OpenChain finished our voting process in ISO about a week ago. We are, of course, an ISO official international standard now. We are just waiting our publication, which will happen within 5 weeks. We don't know the exact date yet. It depends on ISO, but we know it's within 5. And at that point, we'll have our ISO number to share with you all. By way of a reminder, every company that is OpenChain 2 conformant is automatically conforming with the ISO standard. So that's nice. Whether you're an OpenChain partner, in which case your clients can very easily, in the case of conformant organizations or nearly conformant organizations, use the ISO number, or you're a user company, in which case things like your existing communication with suppliers or customers can easily seg into the ISO number and whatever you want to do with that, whether it's contracts, sales tenders, or general conversation. I'll be keeping everyone up to date by the minute on the ISO standard. All right. It is 4 minutes past the hour. So it's 1:04 here in Japan, 9:04 in US Pacific, 5:04 in the UK, and 6:04 in Central Europe. Thank you for everyone who's joining us outside of office hours. I'm aware that in Germany and so on, it's time to go home. So thank you for that. And for those of you who have joined us from Asia, like Ninoji-san from Toshiba, thank you for being completely exceptional. Welcome. We are going to have an interesting discussion today. We have some of our friends and colleagues from OSADL, a German entity that they will tell you more about. Essentially, they help aspects of industry engage with and address matters around things like open source. And in a very similar manner to us, they've gone through the conversation where open source policy templates are regarded as important or indeed critical. And as part of their work with their member companies and other adjacent companies, they've developed an open source policy template. As most of you know, we actually have an official open source policy template for the OpenChain project, and we use that extensively. And that is, of course, our default recommended approach to building an open source policy. It happens to allow you to do so in various ways. It provides structure, example language, and whatnot. But OpenChain is about diversity and freedom of choice. And our member companies, our user companies, continually ask for multiple examples of open source policies. Sometimes they want to see a company policy. So for example, I might show them the SUSE open source policy, which is on their website. And the current one was developed for OpenChain and is under a CC licensing. Awesome people. And sometimes I guide them to other areas. And I think it's great that we have the opportunity to learn more about what OSADL is doing based on their experience and their feedback. And to use that, hopefully, as knowledge we can take back to our stakeholders. Now, as always, we're going to show the antitrust policy notice before we get going. Before we start any of these meetings, we show this notice, and the short version is that we have an antitrust policy at Linux Foundation. We have some wonderful legal counsel to support us around that, Andrew Updegrove. And if you have any questions, you can look at our antitrust policy and you can talk to our counsel if necessary. That's our preface to all of our conversations. I'm just about to hand over to our friends at OSADL to look at their policy and get run through what they do and why. Just prior to that, I'm going to give you a super quick preview of our policy template.
To look at Rosa's phone.
I think we've got some background noise there. No problem. So this is the OpenChain official policy template. And I realize the text might be difficult to read. I will be putting a link to it in our chat. But the long and short version is that with the initiative and incredible contribution of Andrew Katz and his team at Moorcrofts and Orcrow, this policy template was initially created to address engagement with their clients. Moorcrofts and Orcrow are both official OpenChain partners. And this material allows you to see overviews of example policy text and to understand how that relates to the OpenChain specification. You can see information about licensing, code acceptance, incidents, roles, and training. And basically, you can use this to put together your own policy as you wish. And that's based on market deployment, it's based on client support, and it's based on the fact that our community's had a while to look at it and think about it. But it's time to see what other people are doing in this field. And on that note, I'm going to hand over to our good friend Carsten at OSADL to talk about their policy template, how they built it, why it works, and how you can access this information. OSADL friends, would you like me to hand over screen sharing to you?
Yes, please.
Okay. I have now canceled my screen sharing. You should be able to screen share from the bottom of your screen. While that is being prepared, I will send over our open source policy template link in our chat for all of you. Yes, your screen sharing is showing perfectly.
Do you see the first page of our presentation?
Yes, it's perfect.
So it's not only me, but I have Karen Kresse close to me.
Hello.
So we decided to give you a brief overview about the history of why we decided finally to create such a policy. And then we thought we will try to do another screen share where we not only show you a presentation, but we show you live of how the policy works and how it can then be completed to convert this template into an individual policy. So if you can hear me well and you can see everything, I would like to go ahead and show you the next slide. Is this okay for you?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, here we go. Maybe I can switch to slideshow presentation, in which case it may not work or works. No, it doesn't work that well, but okay, let's go ahead.
So well, it looks perfect on our screens,
yeah,
so
okay.
whatever you're doing with.
Is there a funny green line on your screen as well, or is this only here?
Oh, I can see that. Yeah, there is a green line.
I apologize for this. I don't know where it comes from, but maybe we can go ahead in this way. So let me go ahead. About 15 years ago, people decided that they need kind of a Linux company. Industry was decided to go open source because of the many advantages. But when they went to the management and they explained to the management they would like to go to open source, nobody knew what it is. And they were asked, we need a company for that. And they say, no, there's no company. And the only way to go ahead with this open source in industry was to create such as, well, a Linux company, which is not a company, but someone who represents it. So this was in 2005. And then we started to listen to our members. We listened to the people who decided to found something like OSADL, and they said, well, we need quality. We need the same what we get when we buy software, we need from you. So please provide us with everything. We have the source code. It's wonderful to have the source code, but it's not all. Please provide us with the rest. Well, and first was technical, of course. We would like to have Linux in a way that we can use it in the same way as if it were a proprietary software. So we have someone where we can ask for bug fixes, for additions, and so on. This was the day when we started the QA farm. And this is still today like Linux technical support, Linux real-time technical support. But then shortly afterwards, people say, hey, good that we have technical support, but we need so much more. We need legal support. We need help, how to license. We need to understand licensing. We need all of this. Please provide us with legal support. And then we created a mechanism that every member company, every employee from every member company can send in questions. We forward this question then to our lawyer. Our lawyer would then answer the question. We would pay the lawyer based on our community fee. And then in case this is interesting answer to everybody, we put this on the internet where we have about 100 FAQ from every day's practice of using open source. And people can, normally they first look at the list of what is available. And if nothing is available, they send in the question and then we add the answer again. But some of these questions were a little bit difficult to answer in a short FAQ. This required a lot more work. And then we decide from time to time to create a legal assessment. For example, on redistribution or on particular aspects of how a certain licensing, for example, LGPL works. We have about 10 of those legal assessments. They are between 30 and 150 pages. So it's a lot more to read, but this is because the questions are more complex. And then people say, hey, that's very good, but we would like to show to our customers that we did it right. Is there a way that you can create a certificate, and with the certificate we can then prove our customers and everybody who asked, and then we created our first certificate, the LCA, which is particularly on Linux kernel and on LGPL licensing. And of course, it is not the entire root file system, but it is the most important and the most difficult license, GPL and LGPL. And people normally, they learn a lot. So when a lawyer and a software specialist go for an entire day into the company and they check everything, they do a rebuild, they check all the documents, they also check the company documents. And so people say, normally they don't say, hey, now we need to certify the rest of it, but they say, okay, we learned so much, thank you. Now that we know how to do GPL and LGPL right, we can do right the rest. And then it turned out that people say, well, now we learned that we have so many other licenses, please help us to fulfill license obligations. And then we started to create our checklists. We have about 65 licenses included in a dynamic online form where you can define your use case and you can define the conditions of your redistribution, and then it will tell you what license obligations are to be fulfilled. It lets you print out a list of it, which you can then directly forward to your QA department. And then the QA department, whenever a new product is to be released, and they check the checklist and they return the product to the development department if any of these obligations are not correctly fulfilled. And then people said to us, okay, now we have all these little bits and pieces in place. We have legal FAQ and assessments and LCA and checklists. And what couldn't you help us to create a support to integrate this in a company? Who is going to do the LCA? Who is going to use the checklist? Who is going to look for the legal assessments? Who is responsible for what? We need something there where all these bits and pieces are put all together. Well, and then we said, okay, this looks like you need help for a policy template. And then we created the policy template. And while doing it, we found that this policy template is kind of an umbrella that takes everything into consideration, where a part of it includes aspects from the FAQ, part of it includes aspects from the checklist. And so now I think we have reached a certain endpoint. I don't think that we will create a lot more of these separate projects. We would like in the future to integrate everything into this set of tools, and we will then try to put everything under the umbrella of the policy template. So this was a quick overview about the first 15 years of OSADL. We have about 100 member companies, and we are particularly listening to our members. So we have many events of all kinds where people can tell us what they want us to do. We are a registered cooperative, so we are also kind of a non-profit company, and companies pay us a certain membership fee, and we turn this membership fee into services. Only do services that are needed by the majority of our members. We don't do individual. Normally, we don't provide individual support. So this was the history of the policy template. And if you agree, we would like to switch to the next presentation, where Karin gives you a quick overview about what the policy template is, or alternatively, if you have any questions in between, of course, you are welcome to ask them.
Yeah, feel free to interrupt us at any time.
Yeah.
So, I mean, as you know, from OpenChain, that the most important part about why a policy is needed is to create processes within a company, because if there's no defined processes how to handle anything really, and open source included, then it usually ends in chaos and nothing happens, or only parts happen. And of course, when we created the open source policy template, we integrated the OpenChain specifications as well, and using those processes, but trying to provide a document which is very specific, in particular also for our member companies, which are from automation industry, a lot of embedded systems. So those particular needs have gone into this policy template as well. And above creating processes, we felt that a policy is, or establishing processes in a company is sustainable only when there's an understanding of the concept behind it, and why things have to be done, and how open source works. And this understanding is hard to integrate into a policy, because to be able to make it usable, it should be fairly brief. But we've found a way with the open source policy template to give background information as well for further reading, for whoever's interested, for whoever's handling the policy, but also for whoever has to create the policy and establish it within the company. And I'll show you the structure of the policy later, how we have done that. Of course, the overall goal of an open source policy is always to avoid copyright infringements, to handle open source software compliantly, also to provide control about licensing of a company's own intellectual property, and maybe even to meet customer requirements. And as I said before, to do that, to create such a policy, a certain understanding of the base principles has to be there, and the policy itself, however, should be as brief and as specific as possible to make it usable in everyday's work. And as every company has different approaches to license compliance, their FOSS policy must reflect these, and that's why we, same as OpenChain, have created a template from which a company can create their individual policy. And we've decided to structure it in the following way. We have several chapters with different topics, on different aspects of license compliance. And then within those chapters, within those texts that are given there, we included kind of explanation boxes, some background information of why a particular aspect has to be considered, why a specific decision has to be made. These are marked in little orange boxes. In case there's various options to handle a situation or to interpret a scenario, we present those different options, and also give rationales for them, and there's a possibility to then choose the option of how to handle this. then we have, because of course, when introducing open source into a company, then some company documents like work contracts or contracts with suppliers or customers have to be modified as well. And to do so, we have included some template texts that can be used to modify those contracts. In some cases, maybe the policy itself one should be filled out, for example, to assign particular roles or tasks to someone, then this can be filled out. And as I mentioned before, not all of the background information or forms or processes that are needed can be included in the policy, because it would just make it too big and unhandleable, and that would defy the goals of it. So we've created some annexes that have, for example, some flowcharts on how a process could look like, maybe some forms to provide legal information on products that can be delivered along with the product. And then for actual background reading, be it technical, legal, or practical backgrounds on every topic that concerns copyright law and license compliance and open source, we have a number of supplements to accompany the policy. So if there's no questions up to here, I'd suggest I'll change the screen share to a different document, and we'll just go and look into the policy. So as a beginning, we've so the document policies we've created as a number of, or as a one master PDF document. Can you see the document fine like this?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So we've created one PDF document, which is the master document. This can be filled out, it can be edited by the company that creates their policy, and then those annexes, those supplements are linked from this master file. And as you can see here, this is the orange boxes as we use them in the as I mentioned them before, with some explanation, with some background information, and an overview of the policy content. And then we'll start out with responsibilities, because of course, when processes are defined and when roles are assigned, then tasks have to be assigned to certain roles within a company. And here already we see that individual companies might do this very differently, because they have a different number of employees. So some of these roles might not be one particular person, but might be spread out, or one person in fact might be several roles. So this is all can be adjusted individually. Can you read can you read the writing at all, or is it?
Oh yeah, no problem. Oh, now it's big.
Is it bigger like that?
It's perfect.
Okay. So we have well, first of all, because a lot of decisions that have to be made in a company regarding FOSS policy and licensing, where the management has to be involved, we feel that it should be at least mentioned that the management has to make some final decisions, even though they can delegate. But in the end, it's the management of a company that approves the FOSS policy, makes general decisions on how to handle open source software, and to delegate that, they would appoint an open source compliance officer. That person, or that maybe a whole department for bigger companies, is responsible for implementing processes for creating this FOSS policy. They organize training, and they're more or less the first contact externally and internally for any questions that arise concerning open source. such an open source policy or compliance officer can be assigned directly within the policy, or of course in some external documents or wherever a company handles those things. And here we see how these options are presented in the policy as italic options, and then these fields can be filled out. Of course, there's other roles involved as well in the a FOSS policy, as for example, a project leads who decides what software to use. They create a bill of material, and they are involved in what licenses are acceptable for a particular software. And most all the roles are mentioned here and described in this FOSS policy. The legal department, which can be internal or external depending on the company. Their main responsibility is reviewing license checklists, interpreting licensing, and of course adapting legal documents. Software developers test software. They're mainly the first point where software enters the company. So their training, their knowledge about open source software and how to handle it should be established in trainings and workshops. They're also the ones who introduce software into internal repositories, so they need to know the responsibility that goes with that of handling third-party software. Also, of course, they would be involved in scanning, collecting information that has to be delivered along with products. And but also some roles that should not be forgotten in a FOSS policy are the purchase department, as they are also responsible for incoming software and need to be aware that in purchase contracts, for example, FOSS needs to be considered, and that that a bill of material has to be requested, for example, also from a hardware provider that delivers hardware that already contains software. So some training and some consideration is required here. Same goes for the quality management that needs to be considered, that needs to make sure that no product leaves the company without all license obligations being fulfilled, so that it is legally fit as well as technically fit. And if we go on, of course, some training, the way the training is organized in the company should also be considered in the policy, the way it is communicated within the company. And then one of the most important parts of a policy is detection and analysis of third-party software. So incoming software into the company, how is that handled, and how are the different aspects that need to be considered. So we need to first of all see how, in what forms software may enter the company, and as for example, as a purchased software, or as a tool, or maybe also installed on hardware. And then some general decisions have to be made on how to differentiate between software that is considered to be used in a product, and so copied and distributed, and software that is only to be used in-house, where, as we know, no FOSS, at least open source licenses, do not require any license obligations to be fulfilled. So these general decisions have to be made either company-wise or even project-wise, and should be documented in some way. Then, I mean, through all of this policy, and there's a lot of rules to be followed and things to be considered, but it should also remain clear that testing for technical suitability of any software should always remain open in order to not hinder the actual development of a product. So that is also set down in the company policy. As long as no terms of use or no particular license agreement has to be accepted when downloading a software, then anyone can do so and can test for technical suitability. And only if a product is usable, works for a particular project, it turns into a candidate for use and then has to go through a certain approval process. And this approval process mainly consists of collecting the complete corresponding source code, extracting license information, and then scanning and considering how the software component is integrated into a project to see how license compatibility has to be considered. And to make sure that not for every software component that is considered, an individual approval request is sent to, for example, the open source compliance officer or the legal department. We suggest an approval process that everyone who enters software into a company can follow. And in our policy template, this approval process is outlined in an annex. And I'll switch to that. We'll see if that works now. You probably can't see the new window. Yeah, just one moment. Okay. Can you see the flowchart now?
Yes.
Thank you. So that is our suggestion for how a software component that enters the company or has gone through technical testing should be handled. So first of all, the complete corresponding source code must be obtained. If that is not available, then no license scan can be done and no rebuild tests can be done. And in general, license obligation cannot be fulfilled. So we suggest not to use such software at all. And then basically you can go through this flowchart step for step and find out if individual approval is required or not. And here we already go into some detail. If a software component creates a derivative work or is intended to create a derivative work with other FOSS, then compatibility has to be considered, license compatibility. And here we start using those the separate components that Carsten talked about before, that OSADL offers to its members or even to the public, as for example the compatibility matrix that is part of the license obligation checklist project that can now be consulted when going through this approval flowchart. And then it ends up at either a stop, so the software cannot be used, at a go, the software can be used in the project, or at an individual legal request to the legal department, which is then though greatly reduced and doesn't have to be done for every piece of software that enters the company. And of course, all of these steps have to be documented. The source code has to be archived to make sure that this is reproducible and can be followed again afterwards. So this is the part for handling. Oh, okay. Okay. I'll go back to the master document. There we go. That's the part about third-party software, and of course, after approval has been obtained, either by going through the process or by individual request, it has to be checked in. All the material, the license information has to be archived so that it is available later on, either when the product is being delivered or when someone else considers the same software component for use. And that's actually the next step. If we look at flow of software through a company, we've had incoming software now. We'll look at outgoing software in the next step. So as most FOSS licenses require to deliver certain information along with the software, collecting this information and then considering of how it is used is one of the most important parts of being license compliance. And in this chapter, we've drawn a lot from our experience with our member companies and have created different use cases to make sure that because for every use case of how software is developed, different aspects need to be considered. I'll go through them fairly quickly. So we have internal use. So as we know, there might not be any obligations at all, even though software as a service might have to be considered as an extra use case. There's distribution of unmodified source code, of modified source code, of unmodified binaries or of modified binaries. As I mentioned before, software as a service is its whole own chapter. Distribution of a Linux kernel in an embedded system. Of course, this is our specialty. That's also what the license compliance audit considers. So we've gone into quite a bit of detail on this particular aspects, also as an example for how this can be done in detail. And all of these use cases then give some instructions and finally point to a lot of the resources that we offer as the license checklists do, and some of the FAQs, some in this case of our legal assessments as well, distribution of an entire Linux distribution, updates, as we've made the experience that updates need to be considered in particular. And then of course, this isn't a use case, but for all of these, a bill of material has to be created. We offer also a form, a template form of what such a bill of material could look like and what information it could contain, how this has to be documented, and also how this license information needs to be updated when, for example, a new version is being used. So just all of the different aspects that need to be considered here. Then, of course, after collecting all of this license information, it has to be delivered, which should be considered in accordance to the applicable use case. And the QA process that I've already mentioned this, the QA department or whoever is responsible for quality assessment in a company quality assurance has to make sure that a product is not only technically fit, but legally fit to be delivered as well. And if that is not the case, then of course it has to go back and this error has to be corrected. So much for FOSS license information, delivery of FOSS license information. Another big aspect that should be considered when handling open source in a company is contribution, because as we've seen that when a company uses FOSS, sooner or later they will also contribute for various reasons. And if that happens, then this should be happen in a controlled form, because if an employee creates software, the rights for this software lie with the employer. And so if they want to contribute this to a FOSS project, the developer needs a permission to do so. And of course, to obtain this this permission is probably handled differently in different companies. It may need actual approval from the management maybe for smaller companies, or for larger companies, this can be delegated as well to project leads or middle layer management. But in general, the general rules always apply, that the contributor should be approved, the FOSS project that is contributed to has to be approved, different aspects should be considered as for example, the license, the software quality, the overall reputation of a project, and if there's any contributor license agreements as well. And then the contribution itself needs to be approved as well, seeing if there's any internal knowledge within that contribution that a company is not willing to contribute, then of course they should take that out. The code quality, because as a contribution reflects on a company's reputation as well, they should make sure that it has a high code quality. Yes, making sure that there's no third-party content involved. If there's any other agreements on this development, and again documenting all of these approvals appropriately. And this contribution permission, again, we've created an annex of what such a contribution permission could look like. So that's for contributions to existing FOSS projects. Of course, there might also be own FOSS projects if a whole project, if a company wants to make their whole project available as FOSS, then they have various aspects to consider as well. I think that could be a whole policy in itself. We've only touched upon the subject lightly, and giving in a supplement, giving some hints of what needs to be considered when selecting a license for a project. So that would be one of those supplements with like further background reading that I mentioned before. And then, of course, when such a policy is implemented in a company, the processes have been established, and a company wants to make sure that they work well and that everything actually turns out a company that works and a product that works. We just mentioned different types of certifications. Of course, the OpenChain certification, which I think concentrates on company processes, and our license compliance audit, which is a specific product audit. Yes, so that's the main aspects of the open source policy template. Are there any questions so far?
Yeah, I have a question. I was looking actually at the policy template on GitHub, so OSADL /policy
Yeah.
FOSS policy template, but that one looks different than what you just showed me. I think it's not really up to date.
No, it is.
It is.
It's just on GitHub we have the plain text versions of that. So content is exactly identical, but it is just as text versions and not as PDF. But the content is exactly the same. And if you look up the README of the GitHub policy, we format it in a way that reflects these different layouting that we've used in the PDF version. But so far, we've made the PDF version available on request. But you can send us an email and I'll send you that version as well, happily.
Yeah, no, I was looking at because the picture of I think it was, you had a blacklist, whitelist picture that you just showed us. And I was trying to find that one.
Oh, okay. So
because I had a question about it, but you moved over, so I thought I'd look in the GitHub, quickly see if I could find it.
I'm sorry. Yeah. So in the approval process, there's a step that says check blacklist and check whitelist. But that's just a suggestion. So we've not actually created a blacklist or a whitelist because that is very individual for a company. But a company might decide, we're always happy for you to use anything that's MIT licensed. So they might put that on the whitelist. Or for whatever reason, they decide not to use not to allow a particular license because, I don't know, it's old and unclear or for whatever reason, and they might put that on a blacklist or do a project-specific blacklist that they say, for this particular project, we do not want to use this particular license. And so we only make this suggestion that a company could do that, but we have not actually filled out a blacklist or whitelist. Is that
No,
what you're referring to?
yeah, no, it was, I was looking at it and I was like looking at the picture and I was like, yeah, it kind of works, but it's not how well, I don't call it blacklisted, whitelisted more. I call it allow and deny list, but they don't really. I see a lot of tools implementing allow deny listing, but they don't really work unless you add a lot more to the formula. What I'm trying to say is, for instance, a GPL found on a build tool may, for instance, be completely acceptable.
Yeah, of course. So the point is that it needs to be software, needs to be considered. I think we that is mentioned somewhere in the text that core software has to be checked depending on whether it is delivered along with the product or whether it stays within the company. So that's the differentiation between the internal use or used in a product.
What you see here is a document in documentation form, but the same document is available in a form that can be individually completed. It has little tick boxes, little check boxes, and little text fields. So we are just showing here the version as documentation, as a document for documentation purposes. But if a company decides to use this as a real template, then they can use the other version that is made in a way as a form and can be completed individually. So if possible, a company may take just this base document, complete it, and 15 minutes later you have your policy. It may not be the one that you really would like to have, but the principle is that we wanted to provide something that makes it easy and comprehensive to create an individual template for a company. And this is why we have differentiated everything into these 3 layers. The first layer is the one that you have seen here. The other layer you have already seen a little bit when we showed the flow chart. And the third layer is the one that we feel is also very important, and that is also part of the template. We call this part of the template, but it's a selection of supplements. And if you would like, we would like to give you 1 or 2 little examples of how these supplements are made. So you will find at the end, you will find an overview about the various annexes and supplements. So for example, we have annexes. We already showed you one. So there are a number of annexes. And the idea of an annex is that is a short, quick information that could be part of the license that contains examples of how something would look like. For example, the contribution permission that Karen mentioned is here. This is an example and has also fields to complete. So we would like to make it easy for a company to print it out and to give it to the manager and to say, manager, please sign here. And but this is another level, and the other level is the level of the supplements for further reading. This is rather long and is not just read in a couple of minutes. This is something particularly if you look at derivative work or is copyleft. We try to explain everything so that even people who have not yet been familiar with all of this, who are for the first time confronted with the obligations of license, of open source license, they can have a look. And so if you allow, I would have a quick look into what is a derivative work. It is the longest, it is the heaviest, and it was the most difficult to create and had most discussion time. But instead of showing you so many, I would like to show you this one as an example so that you can see of how deep we decided to go to provide internal and background information of all of this. This requires that I click on this one and then I disable the sharing of the old one and I re-enable sharing of the new one and go back to this document. This looks similar to the other one. Let me make it a little smaller and let me increase the size a bit. I think then it made it easier for you to read. Should it not be possible to read or should something be wrong, please let me know. I go to slide. No, this was not good. Let me go back from slideshow. So the idea is that we provide background information. We create the terms, the reasons why we do all this. And then we go relatively deeply in scenarios of software combinations to explain what is the mechanism, why could a source code, why could a binary be derivative of another one or not, because we learned that this is what people most of the time would like to understand better, and to have a guide to decide in a practical case of whether this is derivative or not. Because also, as you know, many people are afraid that they overlook derivative and then later on may no longer be able to deliver what they already had. And we have little explanations. So we create a source code modifications, we explain what a patch is, and then we have, at the end of every chapter, we have 3 columns where we decide what we believe is the mainstream interpretation of that case, what is the view of FSF, and what is our recommendation. And as you see here, fortunately, they are all in line. And then we have new scenarios, adding function to a single source code for then calling that function. Then we explain what is this, what is a call. We tried very hard to explain everything in such a way that it is not restricted to engineers. We wanted a purchase department, legal department, quality assessment department. We tried very hard. Maybe it didn't work in the first place, but we tried very hard to describe everything in such a way that it is even understandable by people who normally do not write code. So we explained in detail what all of this means. And then again, yes, still in line. Then next scenario, providing additional source code with a new function and adding a call to that function. And we explain of all this looks like, again, a patch. We explain the patch looks like, and then yes. But then here goes already into a particular scenario where it is not exactly the same method, and then you see there is no longer mainstream interpretation. There's no law that helps us, because of course copyright law was not made particularly for software, it was made for any kind of work. And so here starts already a certain difference, but hopefully and fortunately FSF and OSADL is still in line. Then we explain other scenarios, and again at the end of the scenario, the interpretation of how we believe how this is considered by the various parties who may decide on this. And then the next one. So this is not, I do a quick scroll through it, not in the hope that you can read everything in time, but just to give you an idea of how deeply we went into this subject and how we did this. And here you see there's still somewhat in line, but not completely. And here's another one, but you see most of the time we are in line, except that OSADL is more decided to give you a recommendation, while the other parties may then at a certain time say, no, we don't know. And at the end, we have also a large section on circumvention, because we rely on technical ways of how software is connected to each other. And of course, it is a primary connection. We call this all the time the primary connection. If people go to modify this connection in the hope that they may circumvent, for example, copyleft, then we make very clear what we meant and why are the pros and the cons, why we believe that you have always to look at the primary connection and not at the modified connection. This is then the conclusion recommended by OSADL, where we call all the various, where we try to conclude on all this thing. And as you see here, it is already a 15 pages document, and many other of these documents are of same size and same comprehensiveness. But of course, we didn't want to put all of this in the master document, because we would certainly scare away people immediately. So this is why this is a little trick. We have the first 15 pages, the master document. People may say, okay, that's short, I can quickly read it. And if they need, they can then dive deeper and go to the annexes and to the supplements. This is a little trick of how we manage to provide, on the one hand, information comprehensive enough to finally implement a policy, but at the same time to have the policy itself short and in such a way that people may then add it to the everyday's reading when they have the one or another situation where they have to deal with open source software. Well, I don't know of how. I mean, if you don't stop us, we can continue the entire night. But of course, I think we would now better ask you whether you would like to discuss with us particular aspects of it, or whether you want me to show you another annex or another supplement. Please let me know where you would like to go from here.
So if one wants to get a copy of all of EPDS, you're just sending an email to info@osadl.org, right?
Yeah, exactly. We'll send you.
Yeah, let me quickly stress this point. You know, we always, in the same with our checklist, it could be considered kind of an individual legal advice. And particularly here in Germany, but there are other places in the world where a non-lawyer may not give an individual legal advice, only a general or an academic advice, if you want. So we are an open source company, and we are, of course, we make most of it available under an open source license, and we would like also to have this at least half of our services made available to the rest of the world. We still need to have some services restricted to members, because otherwise members would cancel the membership. So we have such a overall rule that half of our services are made available for everybody without any restriction, and half of the services, particular services, are then available particularly for members. But those many services, of course, our quality assessment of our OSADL farm and all of this is available without any condition. But the legal things, such as the checklist and the policy template, we would like to make available only upon request, because along with when we send out the material, we have a disclaimer, and we would like to make sure that there's a disclaimer where we tell very clearly we are not lawyers. We have lawyers who advise us, of course. We have many international acknowledged as experts, legal experts, who help us to do all the work, and they are credited. But it is not an individual legal advice. Please make sure, and please do not implement a policy without asking your lawyer or your legal department. And this is why we have this little threshold, this little thing that we would like you to ask. Please send us an email, and then we send you everything you would like to get.
I also have a question. Thank you for this presentation. It's a very comprehensive template. So thank you for that. And as now the ISO is there, and I think so as a typical company would have then also ISO audits, ISO specification, and potentially also, well, if you acquire a new company and the new company would state, okay, we're ISO conformant, and we have such a, for example, such a policy based on this template, could we then easily do a cross-check what is already covered by via the OpenChain or ISO standards, so that we could really check, okay, this is, if you're already ISO conformant, then you cover already those spaces, parts. And what is the delta then in case of our company that you still additionally have to fulfill to cover our requirements from our company? Because here this is some use cases. I like the use cases, yeah, so that we say, yeah, additionally to ISO, we have this specific, I don't know, this and that use case, but as you are already ISO, you already cover that, but please additionally have a look at this. Is there an easy way to make such a delta?
Well, we could do so, but I should mention that there's no competition between going ISO, going OpenChain, and using our template. You go ISO to adhere to the standard, to show other companies that you are standardized and everything. But we provide this as a practical work. It is something where you just go ahead, you use it, and you integrate it. And it is not to show others. We have the LCA and we have other things where you show this to others, but this is not to be kind of a way where you prove others that what you did. This is something that really is intended to help with everyday practice so that people can just look, sit down, take the template, and we tried very hard. We had many brainstormings, and we tried very hard to cover everything that is imaginable. And we have already received some feedback information. It is now version 1.1. We plan until the end of the year to release 1.2, where we'll have then some of the feedbacks that we received integrated. But I think you can very easily do both. Go ISO and go the standard way. I mean, some of these things are also covered by ISO 9001. And so it is not a competition, it is one layer below, I would say. So I think that people would start with this template, with the open source policy template from OSADL, and try to understand, get the background information, include all the external and internal advisors and what you need. And once you have this, you call the ISO people, and then they come and say, hey, wonderful, you feel that everything is already well done, so here's the stamp, here's the standard. Or they may find something because they may not have interpreted everything correctly. So it is not something that competes with it, but it is the base work required to get ISO, I would say. But if you want, we could have, one day we could sit down and make a little note at the margin of every page and to say to what ISO section this relates. This could be done.
I think like comparing with part of a policy or standard a particular company adheres to compared to another one is difficult because many of these aspects are very individual depending on what a company does and what use cases apply to them. So I would imagine that actually making a general delta would be difficult, but very individual.
Okay, thank you for that.
Well, we're a little bit past the hour, so I think we've got time for one more question, if there is a question, and if not, we will wrap it up there.
And if you think of any questions later on, feel free to email us, info@osadl.org.
Wonderful.
Yes, please, we had no idea of how long you would like us to talk or how deeply you would like to go. As I said, there are a number of other documents. On the other hand, it may be easier instead of reading for you. You could better read yourself. So please, if you are interested, send us an email. We make this archive available to you. Unpack the archive and click through it, and then you get, I think, a better and a broader information of what all this is about. It is something you can even play with it. You saw these little blue links in all the documents. So whenever you click on one of these links, it will automatically bring you to the next document. And so you can really make use of all this hypertext functionality, and you get spend hours and hours and just clicking through it and learn of how all of this is interconnected. But again, if you would like us to use, if there's a remaining time and you would like us to go to other, but I don't think this makes much sense. So please decide yourself what you would like to do. And in any case, send us an email and we will immediately send to you whatever you would like to get. And please specify. So we have these two completely different things. Today we reported on our policy template, but the checklist project is part of it. So some of the documents may only be available if you have also checklist access. So those of you who have not yet checklist access, but would like to get the policy template, please specify whether you also would like to get checklist access, in which case we provide both of you so you get the whole range of information.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Karen. Thank you so much, Karsten. This has been fascinating, and we will definitely be bringing you back for another webinar if you're willing to cover other aspects of your work.
Sure, pleasure.
Wonderful. And as I said, this is recorded. Our friends in Asia will be reviewing this in the days and weeks to come. Big thank you to everyone who dialed in. A special thanks to Ninoji-san from Toshiba for being here in the middle of the night, but also to our friends in the UK who are now well past close of business, our friends in Germany who are just a little bit past close of business, and our friends in the US who gave us a whole chunk of their Monday morning, everyone's favorite day. Thank you all, and I will talk to you soon, probably next week on the specification discussion or the week after on our next webinar.